Welcome, friends. It's nighttime here, and I'm ready to share my research about the deeply rooted issues surrounding satanic panic that started in the mid-1980s and spread like wildfire throughout our country. It's important because many years later, the seeds planted in the minds of our medical and psychiatric communities would continue to grow and ripen in a town called Logan, Utah.
In what may become one of the biggest child cases ever on record, 7 nursery school teachers were arraigned today on more than 100 counts of child.
The accused include the preschool owner, 76-year-old Virginia McMartin, her daughter, and 2 grandchildren.
Satanic panic was a term used for a public mass panic consisting of over 12,000 unsubstantiated cases of ritual satanic behavior, starting in the United States in the 1980s and then spreading throughout many parts of the world by the late 1990s. And a lot of this still persists today. The panic originated in 1980 with the publication of a book called Michelle Remembers. The book was co-written by Canadian psychiatrist Lauren Pastor and his patient, who became his future wife, Michelle Smith. They used recovered memory therapy to make sweeping, lurid claims about satanic ritual behavior involving Smith's childhood. The release of Pasdar's book led to many psychiatrists and therapists using the recovered memory approach, especially when working with children.
Observations of experienced therapists leave little doubt that children in our society are at risk of being ritually
abused by an occult practitioner, finding the key to unlock the child's horror-filled and totally confused subconscious mind.
We often find that children have had monsters who have been programmed by cults in order to get a child to get an altar that will help them perpetrate, that will become cult identified.
Some of the crimes inflicted by these people are as serious or possibly even more atrocious than those that were done by the Nazis in World War II.
We find in children who have been so severely traumatized as children who have been ritually abused is dissociation.
One of the most common ways that children defend against abuse is to dissociate.
To get at those memories, therapists use techniques like hypnosis.
And certified experienced hypnotists should be available.
In hypnosis, try to get her to relive the experience of her abuse.
You, as we mentioned, will be testifying for the prosecution in defense of memory repression. What evidence do you have that really supports that it exists?
Well, it really has been written about for well over 100 years that basically after terrible things happen to people, their memory system gets screwed up.
Now allegedly discredited, Michelle Remembers was written in the form of an autobiography and presented the first modern claim that a child was linked to satanic ritual inappropriate behavior. Pasdar was also responsible for coining the term ritual abuse. Michelle Remembers provided a model for numerous allegations of satanic ritual behavior that ensued later in the same decade. On the basis of the book's success, Pazdar developed a high media profile. He gave lectures and training on satanic ritual behavior to law enforcement, and by September 1990, he had acted as a consultant on more than 1,000 cases, including the McMartin preschool trial. During this time, allegations rose up throughout the United States, and they involved reports of physical and inappropriate behavior of people in the context of occult or satanic rituals. In its most extreme form, allegations involved a conspiracy of a global satanic organization that included the wealthy and powerful elite. The accusations included tales of being abducted or even bred for sacrifice, an allegation that returned to prominence later in the form of QAnon. This all seems so scary, but the reality is that nearly every aspect of the ritual theory is controversial, including its definition, the source of the allegations, and proof afterwards. The idea of ritual inappropriate behavior continued to permeate the national media, even weaving a sinister web through popular cultural references and TV shows of the time. In 1986, an author named Phil Phillips published Turmoil in the Toy Box, a book dealing how Masters of the Universe and other popular cartoons of the era were endorsing pagan satanic practices. He explained that cartoons like the Thundercats were inspired by heathen gods, that E.T. died and was resurrected again and could therefore be confused with Christian figures, and that there are things we need to look at concerning the Smurfs. Because the characters are blue with black lips, they were supposed to be depictive of creatures. Collectively, Saturday morning cartoons, he said, would teach children to get into spells and witchcraft. Lastly, he pointed out that Rainbow Bright had a pentagram on her cheek.
Into a land filled with darkness came a little girl with a mission. After proving herself to be worthy and brave, she became known as Rainbow Bright. Now, along with her magnificent horse Starlight and her loyal and true friends Twink and the Color Kids, she lives far away in Rainbow Land.
But it wasn't just solely popular culture of the 1980s that was being examined for traces of occult worship. In 1986, two evangelists from Ohio, Jim Brown and Greg Hudson, claimed that they had excavated a hidden message in the unlikeliest of sources, the theme song from Mr. Ed. The 1960s sitcom about a talking horse opened with the title song A Horse is a Horse, but played backwards, the preachers insisted one could hear sinister undertones like the source is Satan, and someone heard this song for Satan. The discovery was mentioned during a seminar for teenagers on the moral evaporation caused by rock music. Then, at the very height of satanic hysteria in 1988, broadcast journalist Geraldo Rivera compiled a 2-hour special for NBC that purported to detail the lurid mission of devil worshippers. It was called Devil Worship: Exposing Satan's Underground, and it hypothesized that a secret cabal of Satanists, numbering in excess of 1 million, were responsible for messages in heavy metal and inspiring the behaviors of leaders like Charles Manson. The majority of them are linked in a highly organized, very secretive network, Rivera intoned. From small towns to large cities, they have attracted police and FBI attention to their satanic ritual, inappropriate behavior, child pee, and grisly. The odds are that this is even happening in your own town. The special aired in primetime to stellar ratings, grabbing the attention of nearly 20 million homes, although advertisers were reluctant to buy commercial spots. While Rivera presented a compelling case for concern, the mass media took care to note that the special didn't come from NBC's news programmers. It was a product of the entertainment division. Finally, satanic panic led to what has become known as the McMartin Preschool tragedy. In 1983, Judy Johnson, mother of one of the McMartin Preschool's young students, reported to the police that her son had been SA'd by her estranged husband. But then eventually she also said that he was SA'd by McMartin Preschool teacher Ray Buckey. Ray Buckey was the grandson of the school's founder, Virginia McMartin, and the son of the administrator, Peggy McMartin Buckey. It was a family-run business. Judy Johnson's belief that her son had been SA'd began because her son was having painful bowel movements. What happened next is still disputed. Some sources state that at that time, Johnson's son denied Johnson's suggestion that his preschool teacher had SA'd him, but then others say that he actually confirmed the SA. Later, Johnson went on to make several more accusations, including that people who worked at the daycare were even inappropriate with animals. Ultimately, Ray Buckey was questioned, but was not prosecuted due to a lack of evidence. The police then sent out a letter to about 200 parents of students at the McMartin school, stating that their children might have been SA'd, and asked the parents to question their children about it. The letter read like this: "Dear parent, this department is conducting a criminal investigation involving Child S.A. Ray Buckey, an employee of Virginia McMartin's preschool, was arrested September 7, 1983 by this department. The following procedure is obviously an unpleasant one, but to protect the rights of your children as well as the rights of the accused, this inquiry is necessary for a complete investigation. Records indicate that your child has been or is currently a student at the preschool. We are asking your assistance in this continuing investigation. Please question your child to see if he or she has been a witness to any crime or if he or she has been a victim. Our investigation indicates that possible criminal acts include," and then they go on to list many vivid forms of SA. Also, photos may have been taken of children. Any information from your child regarding having ever observed Ray Buckey leave the classroom alone with the child during any nap time, or if they have observed Ray Buckey tie anyone up, is important. Please complete the enclosed information form and return it to this department in the enclosed stamped return envelope as soon as possible. We will contact you if circumstances dictate. We ask you to keep this investigation strictly confidential because of the nature of the charges and the highly emotional effect it could have on this community. And then lastly, at the bottom, they wrote, "There is no evidence to indicate that the management of Virginia McMartin's preschool had any knowledge of this situation, and no detrimental information concerning the operation of the school has been discovered during this investigation. Also, no other employee in the school is under investigation for any criminal act." After this letter was disseminated, several hundred children were then interviewed by the Children's Institute International, a Los Angeles-based therapy clinic run by Kay McFarland. The interviewing techniques used during investigations of the allegations were highly suggestive and invited children to pretend or speculate about what events occurred. By spring of 1984, it was claimed that 360 children had been treated inappropriately at the preschool. Kay McFarland developed a new way to interrogate children with atomically correct dolls and used them in an effort to assist disclosures of any SA with the McMartin children. After asking the children to point to the places on the dolls where they had been and asking leading questions, McFarland diagnosed SA in virtually all of the McMartin children. She coerced disclosures by using lengthy interviews that rewarded discussions of SA and punished denials. The trial testimony that resulted from such methods was often contradictory and vague on all details. Although the initial charges in the McMartin case featured allegations of satanic inappropriate behavior and a vast conspiracy, these features were dropped relatively early in the trial, and prosecution continued only for non-ritual allegations of SA against 2 defendants. A woman named Astrid Heppenstall Hager performed medical examinations and took photos of what she believed to be minute scarring on the children, and she stated that these were caused by some form of infection. But later, many would go on to question her conclusions. Journalist John Earle believed that Astrid's findings were based on unsubstantiated medical histories, and later research demonstrated that the methods of questioning used on the children were extremely suggestive, leading to false accusations. Others believe that the questioning itself may have led to false memory syndrome among the children questioned. Only 41 of the original 360 children ultimately testified at the grand jury and pretrial hearings, and fewer than a dozen testified at the actual trial.
A child abuse prevention center. At the request of prosecutors, CII social worker Kee McFarland and her team had been videotaping interviews with the preschoolers.
Using puppets to encourage the children to reveal what happened, the therapists were able to unlock the horrible secrets of the McMartin school.
Virginia McMartin, her daughter, 2 grandchildren, and 3 other teachers were ultimately indicted on more than 300 counts.
Michael P. Maloney, a clinical psychologist and professor of psychiatry, reviewed videotapes of the children's interviews. Maloney testified as an expert witness on interviewing children, was highly critical of the techniques used in the McMartin preschool case, referring to them as improper, coercive, directive, problematic, and adult-directed in a way that forced the children to follow a rigid script. He concluded that many of the kids' statements in the interviews were generated by the examiner. Transcripts and records of the interviews contained far more speech from adults than children, and demonstrated that, despite the highly coercive interviewing techniques used, initially the children were resistant to interviewers' attempts to elicit disclosures. The recordings of the interviews were instrumental in the jury's refusal to convict. They demonstrated how children could be coerced to giving vivid and dramatic testimonies without even having experienced SA. Also, there were so many improbable allegations. Some of the inappropriate behavior was alleged to have occurred in secret tunnels beneath the school. Several excavations of the McMartin preschool turned up no evidence of any secret chambers or tunnels. There were claims of crazy, inappropriate behavior at car washes and airports, and of children being flushed down toilets to enter secret rooms where they were harmed, but then they were cleaned up and presented back to their parents at the end of the day. Judy Johnson, who is the mother that made the initial allegations, made bizarre and impossible statements about Raymond Buckey, including that he could fly. Though the prosecution asserted Johnson's mental illness, allegedly schizophrenia, was caused by the events of the trial, Johnson finally admitted to them that she was mentally ill before the trial began. Evidence of Johnson's mental illness was actually withheld from the defense for 3 years. Actually, one of the original prosecutors, Glenn Stevens, dropped the case in protest because Glenn stated that other prosecutors had withheld evidence from the defense, including the information that Johnson's son was never able to identify Ray Buckey in a series of photographs. It was such a long road to the conclusion of the McMartin preschool case, but in 1986, a new district attorney, Ira Reiner, called the evidence incredibly weak and dropped all charges against Virginia McMartin, Peggy Ann Buckey, Mary Ann Jackson, Betty Rader, and Babette Spittler. Peggy McMartin and Ray Buckey remained in custody awaiting trial. Finally, on January 18, 1990, after 3 years of testimony and 9 weeks of deliberation by the jury, Peggy McMartin Buckey was acquitted on all counts. Ray Buckey was cleared on 52 out of 65 counts and freed on bail after more than 5 years in jail. 9 of 11 jurors at a press conference following the trial stated that they did believe that the children had been hurt, but the evidence did not allow them to state who had actually committed the SA beyond a reasonable doubt. The McMartin preschool case left a legacy that reverberates through our national consciousness even today. The case lasted 7 years and cost $15 million. It was the longest and most expensive criminal case in the history of the United States legal system and ultimately resulted in no convictions. The McMartin preschool was closed and the building was dismantled. And in 2005, one of the children, as an adult, retracted the allegations of SA. Never did anyone do anything to me, and I never saw them doing anything. I said a lot of things that didn't happen. I lied. Anytime I would give them an answer that they didn't like, they would ask again and encourage me to give them the answer that they were looking for. I felt uncomfortable and a little bit ashamed, and I was being dishonest. But at the same time, being the type of person I was, whatever my parents wanted me to do, I would do. All of these satanic ritual accusations brought together several groups of people normally unlikely to associate, including psychotherapists, self-help groups, religious fundamentalists, and law enforcement. Psychotherapists who were actively Christian started advocating for the diagnosis of dissociative identity disorder, and soon after this, accounts similar to the original book Michelle Remembers began to appear, with some therapists believing the alter egos of some patients were the result of possession. And it's here, friends, that our link to Mormonism and Utah steps into the picture. Barbara Snow was a Salt Lake City therapist who believed heavily in the idea of repressed memories and is heralded as having brought satanic panic to the Mormon communities in Utah. Join me next time as we go down a rabbit hole with an introduction to a therapist whose interactions with a girl named Teal, accompanied by her beliefs in the ideas of repressed memories, would heavily influence the direction of a small town named Logan, Utah.
Findings could change the outcome of cases which rest on a child's testimony.
In Lowell, Massachusetts, Shirley Souza watches while her husband Ray tends his vegetable garden. Looks like a normal suburban scene, but the Souza's life is anything but normal.
There's a half a dozen cucumbers.
My phone's ringing.
Several times a day, the phone rings because the State Department of Corrections wants each of them to face the camera attached to the phone.
Shirley Souza, 285 Princeton Boulevard, Lowell, Mass.
The Souzas are prisoners in their home. They're under house arrest. It's part of the 9 to 15-year sentence they received for their 2 grandchildren. The first charges came in a letter from the district attorney.
I came home from work and I walked in and Raymond said, I wasn't going to show this to you, but you better look at it. And I couldn't believe it when I looked and I read it. I just